My name is Morgan Adams. I'm 32 years old, and I'm the forgotten middle child of the Adams software dynasty Boston royalty. At least in their eyes. 10 years ago, I walked into a mahogany-paneled boardroom with a dream in my heart and a game-changing innovation in my hands. I walked out humiliated, invisible, erased. My father told me to leave the business talk to the men who understand the real world. His exact words. This Thanksgiving, I walked back in with a contract, a quiet smirk, and a signature that would end his reign. But before I tell you how I built a tech empire in secret, just to acquire the very company that dismissed me, let me ask you this. Have you ever been overlooked by the very people who were supposed to believe in you? If your ideas have ever been dismissed as cute, or you've ever sat through a dinner where everyone celebrated someone else's mediocrity while your own brilliance was ignored, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop your city in the comments. This story is for you. Because the best revenge, it's not loud, it's legacy. You'd think growing up in a Boston mansion with indoor pools and Bentleys in the driveway meant you had everything. You'd be wrong. I grew up in Brookline, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the state. Picture perfect on the outside. Inside, our house was a throne room, and my father, Harold Adams, was king. My older brother Garrett, crown prince. My younger sister Megan, the darling duchess of Instagram and old money aesthetics. And me, the ghost in the family photo. From a young age, it was clear I didn't fit their mold. Garrett was handed the keys to the kingdom, literally. A VP role fresh out of college with a communications degree and a tan from boating more than studying. My father worshipped him. Every golf swing, every cocktail party speech, every deal Garrett fumbled his way through was celebrated like a Nobel Prize. And Megan? She didn't even pretend to care about the family business. She was too busy curating New England elegance for her followers' lavender-scented candles, silk robes, wide-brim hats, champagne brunches. She used the company name like a brand sponsor, but never touched a spreadsheet. Then there was me, Morgan, the quiet one, the intense one, the one who taught herself to code at 12 and built her first app at 15. I went to MIT, graduated top of my class in computer science and business. I came home with ideas that could have taken our legacy into the next generation. And they treated me like a hobbyist. Every holiday dinner was a lecture on how great Garrett was. Every strategy meeting, a boys' club of middle-aged men who patted me on the head and changed the subject. I remember one Thanksgiving. Years ago, I was pitching an integration platform I'd spent 6 months developing. I had mock-ups, market analysis, proof of concept. 10 minutes in, my father checked his watch, interrupted me mid-slide, and said, "I think we've seen enough." Then, to the board. She just graduated, full of these academic ideas. Let's move on to real business. I remember the heat rising in my chest, the way my voice caught in my throat as they chuckled and moved on like I hadn't just poured my soul into something I truly believed could change the company. That was the night I packed my bags. I left Boston with $5,000 in savings, a MacBook, and one thing they didn't know I had, my grandfather's old engineering notebook. Robert Adams, my grandpa, had started the company in his garage in 1978. He was the real visionary, a genius with greasy hands and wild ideas. Before cancer took him, he showed me his notebooks, sketches of systems, questions about scalability, handwritten formulas beside jam stains and coffee rings. He saw something in me none of them ever did. Before I left, I found his final journal tucked behind some old binders in the home office. No one had touched it in years. Inside, one line stood out. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you teach others to build. I carried that with me across the country. San Francisco greeted me with high rent, endless Rama, and freelance gigs that barely paid the bills. I lived in a studio apartment smaller than my parents' wine cellar. Some nights, I cried from exhaustion. Some nights, I coded until 4 a.m. Some nights, I wanted to call home. I never did. Because they were waiting for me to fail. And I was building. I named my company Everest Holding, quietly. An homage to the mountain I knew I had to climb. I filed the LLC under the pseudonym Emmy Stone Morgan Elizabeth. But no one knew that. For years, I worked in silence, built enterprise solutions for startups, reinvested every dollar, hired people who, like me, had been overlooked. I turned my scars into strategy. Year 3, I developed a proprietary integration tool, something that allowed outdated systems to sync with modern cloud tech. Ironically, almost identical to the idea my father laughed off all those years ago. But this time, no one laughed. VCs came calling. Journalists asked for interviews. Forbes wanted a feature on the mysterious woman behind Everest. I declined every time. Let them wonder. Let them whisper. I had something bigger planned. By year 7, we were valued at $200 million. Offices in 3 cities. Clients coast to coast. But still, I kept my identity hidden. Why? Because I wasn't finished? Because Everest wasn't just my company. It was my weapon. You see, over the past year, I'd been quietly acquiring shares in every company that supplied or depended on Adam's software. Packaging deals, offering upgrades, identifying every weak link in their outdated chain. My COO called it brilliant. I called it personal. 6 months ago, we sent an anonymous acquisition offer through a third party, a generous one. My father rejected it without reading. I knew he would. He still believed Garrett could turn the company around, still thought the boys had it covered, still didn't realize that his favorite child was bleeding the company dry. So I made a new plan. This Thanksgiving, I was going home, not as the daughter they ignored, but as the buyer. And as I zipped up the custom Chanel dress I'd selected for Thanksgiving dinner, slipped on my grandfather's vintage watch, and tucked that same engineering notebook into my carry-on, I knew this wasn't just about revenge. It was restoration. I wasn't coming back to beg. I was coming back to claim. The jet touched down just after 5 p.m. at Hanscom Field, 20 miles outside Boston. Private runway. Private driver. Black Bentley waiting on the tarmac. It was all real. All mine. But as the wind whipped across the pavement and the cold New England air hit my skin, something in me tightened. It had been almost 3 years since I'd last stood on Massachusetts soil, and 10 since I'd walked out of that boardroom red-faced, dismissed, invisible. Now, I was returning not as their daughter, but as their reckoning. The Bentley's engine hummed softly as we passed the familiar rows of colonial estates. Maple trees dusted in late November frost. My hometown hadn't changed. Same stone walls. Same hedges trimmed to architectural perfection. Everything so pristine it could be frozen in time. Brookline was the kind of place that prided itself on legacy. Not growth. Not risk. Legacy. Which is why my father clung so tightly to the company my grandfather had built, and why he never saw me coming. As we pulled into the Adams estate, a wave of muscle memory crashed through me. The crunch of gravel under the tires. The wreath already hung on the front door. Weeks too early. The smell of oak and something cinnamon-baked drifting through the frosted glass. But what struck me hardest was how nothing had changed. The house looked exactly the same. The same stone facade, the same bronze door knocker, The same 3 garden lanterns flickering like sentries. Even the air felt curated, like it had passed through a country club first. I stepped out, high heels hitting the stone pathway with precision. My coat, camel cashmere. My bag, Bottega, subtle. Classic, devastatingly expensive. To anyone else, I probably looked like a slightly more polished version of the Morgan they used to know. But the truth, that girl was gone. Diane, my mother opened the door with a practiced smile and a wine glass already in hand. "There you are," she said. Voice clipped, eyes flicking over my appearance like she was scanning a barcode. "We were beginning to think you'd changed your mind." "Changed my mind?" I wanted to laugh. If only she knew. "Traffic from Hanscom was heavier than usual," I said smoothly. "Nice to see you, Mom." She leaned in for an air kiss that barely grazed my cheek. The scent of Chardonnay clung to her breath like perfume. Inside, the house was already humming with voices and clinking glasses. The fire crackled in the hearth of the great room, casting a soft amber glow over polished hardwood floors and curated antique furniture. I could hear Garrett's voice booming from the kitchen loud, confident, charming in that slick, used car salesman way only he could make people fall for. My father, Harold, stood by the mantel, bourbon in hand, gesturing animatedly at a group of men in blazers. Probably board members. Probably reminiscing about the glory days before innovation required actual innovation. Then, I heard it. His voice, cutting through the crowd. "Well, if Garrett keeps this pace, he'll have Adam's software back on top by Q2. The kid just needs a little more runway." I froze. Not because I was surprised, but because it was always the same narrative. Always Garrett. Always just needs more time. Even when profits were down. Clients were bailing, and the board had started whispering about outside buyouts. I had those reports. My team pulled them. But here, at this shrine of selective memory, Garrett was still the chosen one. "Morgan," came Garrett's voice as he spotted me from across the room. He strode over, bourbon in one hand, the other outstretched like a politician on the campaign trail, tan as ever. Despite it being late November, he looked like a man who hadn't worked a real day in a decade and didn't know it. "Sis, look at you," he smirked. "Finally left San Francisco and the yoga retreats behind." "Huh," I smiled, all teeth. "Miss the East Coast pretense." "Ouch," he laughed, clapping me on the back like I was still 12 and begging for approval. "Glad you're here. Big news tonight. Dad's making a major announcement at dinner. Real legacy-level stuff." My stomach tightened. I already knew what was coming, but I had to pretend I didn't. So I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, another yacht." He winked. "Bigger. Can't say. But you'll want to be at the table." I already had a seat at the real table. "Garrett, you just didn't know it yet." Dinner was served in the formal dining room, long mahogany table. Crystal glasses. Name cards in calligraphy. Classic Adams holiday setup. My seat, farthest from Harold, right next to Megan. "Hey, stranger," she chirped as I sat down, eyes fixed on her phone, probably updating her 400K followers about her quiet family evening in heritage luxury. Megan looked flawless. As always, soft curls. Designer loungewear disguised as elegance. Her plate was untouched. Her wine glass wasn't. "I saw your last reel," I said dryly. "Impressive use of candlelight." She barely looked up. "Thanks. The algorithm loves nostalgia during the holidays. You should try posting more." "Maybe I will," I said, glancing at the wireless mic hidden in the chandelier above the table. You never know what people might find interesting. Across the table, Paul, the family videographer / brother-in-law, gave me a tiny nod. He'd been recording for years, building a documentary on the Addams legacy. Most of it ended up as fluff. But this Thanksgiving, he'd be capturing a very different kind of history. When the plates were cleared and dessert arrived, pumpkin pie, vanilla bean ice cream, all arranged like a Williams-Sonoma catalog, my father stood, glass in hand. "Everyone," he began, voice commanding as ever, "I want to thank you all for being here tonight, especially Morgan, who's finally rejoined us for Thanksgiving." Murmurs of polite laughter. He continued, "As some of you know, Addams Software has entered a period of transition. The market's shifting. Clients are demanding new features. We've had to make tough choices." He paused, then turned toward Garrett with a proud smile. "But after careful consideration and out of a desire to secure our future, I've decided it's time to sell." Gasps. Then silence. Sell. That wasn't part of his original plan. I leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "I've negotiated with a buyer," Harold continued. "It's a full acquisition. Effective in 2 weeks. Clean handoff. Garrett will assist in the transition. But ultimately," he set his glass down, "the company will go to someone with a fresh perspective." Then he smiled that smug, tight-lipped smile that had haunted me since childhood. "And to be clear, none of the children will inherit shares." My fork clinked against my plate. The room went quiet. Megan blinked like someone had unplugged her. Garrett's face dropped shattered mask of entitlement. Even my mother stiffened, wine halfway to her lips. It was cruel. Calculated. Classic Harold. And exactly the opening I needed. Because what none of them knew, what he didn't even suspect, was that the anonymous buyer he'd just agreed to sell to was me. I didn't react when my father announced the sale. Not outwardly. Inside, my pulse thundered like war drums in my ears. My fingers curled so tightly around the stem of my wine glass that I felt the strain in my knuckles. But my face, calm, controlled. A perfect mask refined over a decade of being talked over. Written off. Underestimated. Garrett, on the other hand, was not so composed. "What do you mean none of us inherit?" he blurted, voice sharp and rising above the hush in the room. My father didn't flinch. "It's a clean transition, son. We're protecting the company's future." The buyer insisted on full control. Garrett's eyes darted around the table first to Megan, who looked as confused as she did, makeup perfect. Then to our mother, who suddenly found deep interest in her pie crust. "But I've been running it for 2 years, he said, the veneer of confidence cracking. "You said I'd take over." "And you have," Harold replied coolly. "But it's not enough anymore. The market's changing. We're no longer competitive. Because I outmaneuvered you." I wanted to say, instead. I sipped my wine. Let the silence tighten like a noose. Across the table, my mom finally cleared her throat. "Is the buyer someone we know?" "No," Harold replied quickly. "They operate under a shell corporation. Reputable. Discreet. That's all that matters." I nearly choked on my drink. Garrett's voice dropped to a mutter. "This is bullshit." "Language," my father snapped. "This isn't personal. It's business." That was always his favorite line. His license to destroy whatever and whoever he needed to maintain power. Only this time, it really wasn't personal. This time, it was poetic. After dinner, guests filtered out slowly, drunk on wine and surprise. The board members shook Harold's hand, murmuring half-hearted congratulations. The house quieted down until it was just family, and the living room fire still crackling, tension thick enough to choke on. Garrett had stormed out to the back porch, phone glued to his ear, likely trying to call anyone to find out more about this anonymous buyer. Megan sat stiffly in an armchair, scrolling through her feed. Every few seconds, she'd glance up and frown, like realizing this wasn't some PR stunt she could control. My mother had gone suspiciously silent, sitting next to Harold, but angled away, her wine glass now on its third refill. I rose and excused myself to get some air, walked upstairs, and entered the one room in the house that hadn't changed since childhood. My old bedroom. It smelled faintly of dust and lavender sachet. The walls still held faded photos me at my science fair, my first robotics championship, a worn MIT banner pinned above the desk. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it. It was happening. It was finally happening. I pulled out my phone and opened Signal. Typed one sentence to my COO. James, it's time. Initiate reveal. Within seconds, he replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. It began. The press release would hit inboxes within the hour. The shareholder registry would update overnight. And by 9/9, Monday morning, the industry would know that Everest Holdings had officially acquired Adams Software and that Emmy Stone, the masked founder no one could track, was Morgan Elizabeth Adams, the invisible daughter, the lost heir, the ghost they raised under their roof but never truly saw. When I came back downstairs, the mood had shifted. Garrett had returned, face pale, mouth tight. I called Roger, he said abruptly, referring to our family's longtime lawyer. He couldn't find the buyer's name either. You're telling me Dad sold our legacy to a complete stranger with no due diligence? Harold raised a brow. Roger reviewed the terms. He signed off. But why now? Why the rush? I waited for the moment. That sweet, slow unravel. Because, I said softly, stepping into the center of the room, your buyer made you a deal too good to refuse. Three heads turned to me. Garrett scoffed. You know who it is? I do. Harold frowned. How? I reached into my clutch and pulled out a thin black business card matte finish, embossed in silver. I handed it to him. He squinted at it. Everest Holdings. Morgan E. Adams, founder and CEO. Silence. No one moved. Garrett blinked like he'd been slapped. What the hell is this? My voice didn't waver. It's the name on your acquisition contract. My company. My terms. And your signature. Dad. I turned to Harold. Let the words settle in the space between us like smoke. I'm the buyer. The expression on his face was something I'll remember forever. Not rage. Not even shock. It was disbelief. Pure, staggering disbelief that his daughter, his quiet, forgettable middle child, could have outmaneuvered him at his own game. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Garrett erupted. This is a joke, right? A prank. Morgan, you don't even run a company. I turned to him, calm and razor sharp. I built Everest from scratch. While you were doing corporate vision at golf courses, I was engineering actual products. We've outpaced your market share for 2 years. Megan gasped. Wait, you're the masked tech woman. You're Emmy Stone. Surprise, I said flatly. My mother stood slowly, her face unreadable. But why didn't you say anything? I looked at her, and for the first time, really looked. Her hands trembled slightly. Her eyes weren't angry, just distant, like she was rewatching all those holidays she'd poured wine and said nothing while I faded into the wallpaper. Because no one was listening, I said, and I had to stop asking for permission to exist. Harold finally spoke, his voice low. Hoarse. You planned this. I executed it. I corrected. Every vendor you rely on, I acquired controlling interest. Your last innovation cycle, based on outdated models I patented years ago. You've been playing checkers while I built a chessboard. He stared at the card in his hand like it might self-destruct. But why sell to you? He muttered. Why agree? I gave him a thin smile. You sold to a buyer you didn't bother to research. Because you underestimated me. Because you thought I was still the girl in the boardroom begging for approval. The room was dead quiet. I let the silence hang, then said gently, Now, you get to retire. Garrett gets to relax. Megan can go back to influencing candles. No one's losing anything except control. I turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. Handed it to Harold. Inside, a single page. A new company vision statement. On the bottom, legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you teach others to build. Robert A. Adams. My grandfather's handwriting scanned and restored. Harold stared down at it like it burned. The silence in the room was no longer cold. It was boiling. Garrett's knuckles were white against the armrest. Megan blinked in slow, stunned loops. Lips parted but speechless. My mother looked like she was processing a death. And Harold, well? Harold Adams stared at the page in his hands like it had stolen something sacred from him. Because it had. His control. His legacy. And I hadn't even rolled out phase 2 yet. The next morning, while the family wallowed in shock and bruised ego over burnt turkey leftovers, I was already dressed in a tailored navy suit and on my way to our downtown Boston office, the new HQ of Everest Adams Global. That's right, I wasn't just acquiring Adams software. I was absorbing it, rebuilding it, rebranding it. EAG Everest Adams Global would be the new face of legacy meets innovation. We'd keep the clients who mattered, cut the ones that didn't, and pivot hard into predictive AI for logistics. We had the tech. We had the team. And after this weekend, we'd have the board. James, my COO, was already in the conference room when I arrived. Laptop open. Screens glowing. Fresh coffee on the table. Efficient as ever. They're nervous, he said without looking up. Garrett's been calling board members all night. Trying to rally. I smirked. Let him. He'll only make it worse. We had anticipated the resistance. We had planned for it. I took a seat and pulled out a manila folder. Inside, 52 pages of internal reports, HR complaints, Slack leaks, ethics violations, all tied to decisions made by Garrett during his short reign as interim CEO. He thought no one noticed the inflated invoices, the cozy deals with his buddy's consultancy firm, the sudden disappearance of a junior dev who'd filed a harassment complaint. Please, tech may be fast-moving, but it forgets nothing. By 9 a.m. Ma. The boardroom was full. The same room I had once been laughed out of. Same walnut table. Same cold brew carafes and sterile air conditioning. But this time, I sat at the head. 10 seats filled with men and one woman who had, at one point or another, dismissed me as emotional, idealistic, or my personal favorite, ambitiously naive. I stood, tall and calm. Thank you all for coming. I began. I'll keep this brief. As of this morning, Everest Adams Global is fully operational. All merger paperwork is finalized. You have the new org chart in your inboxes. A few began flipping through printed copies. I watched them swallow their questions. I understand this transition is jarring. I continued. Voice even, but it was necessary. Adams Software's growth had plateaued. Its leadership was fragmented. The product pipeline was outdated. And your stockholders were hemorrhaging confidence. Murmurs. Then Tom Winslow, the silver-haired Harvard alum, country club type, raised his hand. Miss Adams, he said slowly. Forgive my bluntness, but why now? Why the secrecy? If you're as capable as your reports suggest, why not take your rightful place earlier? I walked toward him, heels echoing on polished floors, because 10 years ago, I sat in this room and offered innovation. You all said it was impractical. I paused. You didn't just ignore me. You erased me. I had to earn the right to be heard in a system that was never designed to listen to me in the first place. Tom's eyes darted away. I laid the folder on the table. And now that I've earned it, here's what I'm doing with it. One by one, I exposed Garrett's leadership, the unapproved bonuses, the shell subcontractors, the aggressive layoffs that violated state law, the exit interview from the junior engineer who was transferred after rejecting Garrett's late-night texts. Every claim was backed by documents, screenshots, timestamps, video clips. The room went still. No one defended him. Because they knew. They always knew. They just looked away. And now, I held up the final page. A notarized resolution requesting a vote of confidence in the new executive leadership me. Signed. And you'll retain your seats on the advisory board under EAG. Decline. And we'll consider it a resignation. Severance optional. It took less than 12 minutes. One by one, pens scratched against paper. Even Tom signed. I didn't gloat. I simply turned to James and said, "Notify legal." It's done. That afternoon, back in my office, I stood by the window and looked out over downtown Boston. 10 years ago, I had walked out of this city ashamed, underestimated, and unsure if I'd ever come back. Now, I owned the company they tried to keep me out of. I'd made every single one of them answer for their complicity. But it wasn't just about me. It was about every woman who'd been told she was too much, too loud, too emotional, too ambitious. It was about the coder who got passed over for not playing golf, the assistant with better ideas than her boss, but no right connections, the immigrant founder who built something incredible only to be ghosted by VCs in Patagonia vest. EAG would be built differently. And I was just getting started. That evening, I went back to the Adams estate one last time. Not for dinner, not for closure, but for Megan. She was out on the veranda, phone in one hand, chilled rosé in the other. "Morgan," she said, surprised. "Back so soon. Just finishing something." She smirked. "Garrett's still sulking. Dad's in his study pretending this is fine. Mom's, well, you know?" I nodded. Then I said what I came to say. "I'm offering you a position." She blinked. "What?" "Director of Digital Brand. You're brilliant at building image, audience, emotional resonance. I have seen your metrics. You've built a movement out of soft lighting and lavender oil." She stared. "EAG needs a new face. One that says, 'We've changed.'" A pause. Then she laughed a sharp, surprised bark of disbelief. "You want me in the company? I want people who understand the modern world, who've been underestimated, who've had to prove themselves in front of cameras and critics, who know how to build trust." Megan's expression shifted, guarded, but curious. "This isn't a pity offer," I added. "It's a real position, with real influence." She took a slow sip of wine. Then, "You're not who I thought you were." "No," I said. "I'm who I decided to become." She didn't say yes. Not yet. But she didn't say no either. Which, from Megan, was practically a marriage proposal. Later that night, I opened my grandfather's notebook again, flipped to the page with his final quote. "Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you teach others to build. I added one note underneath it in my own handwriting. Start with fire. Rebuild with truth. The garage still smelled like engine grease and old cedar. The air was heavy with dust, the kind that settles after years of silence. Light filtered in through warped glass panels, slicing across the covered shapes of forgotten tools and half-finished machines. I hadn't stepped into my grandfather's workshop in over a decade. No one had. Really. After he passed, the family sealed it off like a time capsule, as if burying his memory meant burying the parts of ourselves we didn't want to confront. But I remembered this place vividly. I remembered the warmth of his hands, guiding mine through my first motherboard. The way he spoke about circuits like they had souls. And I remembered the cabinet, the old, locked filing cabinet under the workbench, scratched, dented, and always off limits. As a kid, I'd tried to pick it open more times than I could count. Today, I had the key. The lock clicked open with a satisfying pop. I pulled the drawer out, hands trembling not from fear, but from something deeper. Anticipation, reverence, the feeling of standing on the edge of something irrevocable. Inside were folders, dozens of them, labeled meticulously in my grandfather's precise block letters. Patents, 1975. R&D logs, prototype 3. 0. Correspondence, private. I dug deeper, and then I found it. A slim, navy blue journal, bound in worn leather. The initials RAA etched in gold on the corner. My grandfather's personal notebook. The real one? Not the filtered wisdom quotes Harold had cherry-picked for speeches and company Christmas cards. This was untouched, raw, honest. I flipped it open and was greeted with a page dated August 17th, 1982. Harold doesn't understand the tech. He never did. But he wants the power it gives. Wants my seat, my name, my patent portfolio. I've seen the contracts he's trying to forge behind my back, offering private equity groups access to our proprietary algorithm without even understanding it. My throat went dry. I turned the page. I told him today he wasn't ready. He said I'd regret it. Said, Morgan will never be CEO if I have anything to do with it. She was 4 years old, and he said that. My hands trembled. Even then, even when I was a toddler, he had already made the decision to erase me. But it got worse. Dozens of entries outlined Harold's attempts to funnel company IP to a third-party shell firm. Ones my grandfather had spent months trying to trace. He documented every whisper, every NDA violation, every coercive boardroom whisper. But he never took it public. Why? Because of me. If I expose Harold, the board will fracture. Morgan will grow up in a war zone. I can't risk her future to fight my past. He kept it buried to protect me. And in return, Harold turned his legacy into a marketing slogan. I found one last envelope tucked into the bottom of the drawer. Inside, a scanned copy of the original patent registration for our company's AI core. The real one. The architecture every Atom's software system had been built on. The patent owner, Morgan Elizabeth Adams. Filed in trust. Sealed until my 30th birthday. My hands flew to my mouth. That was why Harold had fought so hard to sell before I turned 30. That was why the acquisition clock had ticked so aggressively. Because once I reached legal control, the patent rights reverted to me. Everything built on them, every product, every update, every licensing deal would require my signature, not his. Later that night, I sat alone in the same chair my grandfather used when soldering chips by hand. The weight of the journal in my lap. The silence around me, not empty but sacred. I finally understood the plan he never got to finish. He wasn't building a tech company. He was building an inheritance of belief that innovation belongs to those with vision. not entitlement. That creation should serve purpose, not ego. That legacy is not bloodline, it's integrity. And now, I was the last one who could finish what he started. The next morning, I called a meeting, not with lawyers, not with the board, with the employees. Every engineer, every developer, every QA tester who had ever been gaslit or overworked, or passed over for Garrett's frat bro with a degree in organizational vibes. They filled the main floor of the new office. Folding chairs, coffee carts, standing room by the glass wall overlooking the Charles River. James stood behind me. So did Isabella, my college roommate. Now our lead systems architect. The only person who believed in my AI models back when no one would fund them. I took the mic. And this time, I didn't hold back. I know some of you are nervous. I began, voice steady. I know many of you built your lives around a version of this company that prioritized short-term wins over long-term trust. A few heads nodded. Some of you were told your ideas were too ambitious, too risky, too different. More nods. I pulled out the original patent and held it up. This is our foundation, built not just by engineers, but by visionaries who saw where the world was going, not just where the stock was trending. I opened the journal. Read from it, word for word, including the line where my grandfather called out Harold's betrayal, including the part where he made me the legal heir, not for my last name, but for my mind. The room went still. I closed the journal, placed it gently on the podium. Starting today, we rebuild. As EAG, as engineers, as humans. No more closed doors. No more silent saboteurs. We build with transparency, with fire, with truth. A long pause. Then applause. Not polite. Thunderous. Earned. Outside, I stepped into the crisp Boston air. My phone buzzed. A text from Megan. You were right. Count me in? Then a second one. From an unknown number. Just 4 words. You think this is over? My blood turned to ice. I stared at the message. No name. But I knew exactly who it was. The message burned a hole in my phone. You think this is over? No name. No signature. But I didn't need either. It was Harold. And I knew I hadn't just threatened his ego. I had cracked his entire illusion of control. Men like Harold don't go quietly. They reload. The first shot came 48 hours later. It started with a whisper. A tech blog posted a tip that Everest Adams Global had engaged in insider trading during the acquisition. Then another rumor leaked something about coercion, conflicts of interest, and ethical lapses and how the patent ownership had transferred. Within a day, 3 news outlets were calling my office. By the second day, an anonymous complaint landed in the inbox of the SEC, and by the third, our Series D investors called an emergency meeting, not because they believed the rumors, but because perception is everything, especially when you're a female CEO with a freshly minted merger, especially when your father has friends who play golf with regulators. James and Isabella sat across from me in the conference room, both tense. We ran full diagnostics. James said, tapping his iPad. No leak came from our side. Someone forged a data trail. Sloppy, but just enough to raise flags. Isabella crossed her arms. Garrett doesn't have the brains for this. No, I said, but Harold has the money and the spite. I called our legal counsel, secured a forensic audit, hired a third-party PR firm. Every move, clean, transparent, bulletproof. But Harold wasn't after legality. He was after doubt. And in the American corporate world, doubt is lethal. On Thursday, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, a framed photo of my mother and Harold. Taken in 1983.
Happy.
Young. Her hand resting protectively on her pregnant stomach. Taped to the back. A note in my grandfather's handwriting. Trust is fragile. Even the ones you love can be compromised. It wasn't a warning. It was a dare. I drove to the estate that night. Not out of fear. Out of fury. Harold was in his study, nursing bourbon like always. The fireplace glowed behind him, casting shadows on his smug silhouette. "You really want to start a war with your own daughter?" I asked, stepping into the room. He didn't even flinch. "You fired the first shot." I stepped closer. "No, Dad." I just stopped apologizing for breathing. His smile was slow, cruel. "You're not ready for the cost of power, Morgan. It doesn't reward idealists." I leaned over his desk, locked eyes with him. "I'm not idealistic anymore. I'm exact. I'm surgical. And I've already sterilized your empire. The only thing left is the incision." That got to him. Just a flicker. But it was there. Fear. I turned to leave. But his voice followed. "You think you know everything?" he said. "But the past has layers you've never peeled." I paused. "What does that mean?" He swirled his drink, smirked. "Ask your mother." That night, I drove home faster than I should have. My hands shook as I dialed the number. When she picked up, her voice was small, tired. "Mom," I said, "we need to talk." She met me at a diner halfway between Boston and Newton, the kind with chipped booths and ancient jukeboxes. We didn't order. She just looked at me like she'd aged 20 years since Thanksgiving. "Is it true?" I asked. "Did you know what he did to Grandpa's company?" "What he tried to do to me." Her eyes filled with something I couldn't read. Shame. Maybe. Grief. I knew. "Pieces," she said. "But Harold always kept me out of the loop. On purpose. Not when it came to me." I snapped. "You stood by while I was erased." She flinched. I was scared. She whispered, "You don't know what he's capable of." "I do now." She took a long breath. "There's something you should know. About the patent. About why your grandfather gave it to you and not to your father." My heart paused. She reached into her purse and slid out a folded letter. The paper was yellowed, brittle. It was addressed to me, to Morgan, on her 30th birthday, from Grandpa. I unfolded it. His handwriting. Again, familiar. Strong. "If you're reading this, it means you've made it despite him. Despite everything. I gave you the patent not just because you earned it, but because Harold stole from someone else first. Someone who mattered to both of us." I looked up. "What does that mean?" My mother's lips trembled. "Before your grandfather founded the company, it was co-designed. By a woman. A woman Harold was in love with. Not me." The room tilted. "She wasn't just a partner," she said. "She was the architect of the AI core. She died before the company launched. Harold never credited her. Your grandfather tried to correct that. That's why he made you the heir. Because you were the closest thing to her." The closest thing. I stared. "You're telling me Grandpa's original partner was what?" "My biological grandmother." She nodded. Slowly. My pulse roared in my ears. "You knew this." She wiped a tear. "I knew enough. But Harold, he's been burying this for decades." I stood up. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just corporate. It was blood. He hadn't just stolen code. He'd erased a woman from history and made sure her granddaughter grew up silenced too. The next day, I released the final press file. A scanned letter. Patent files. Journal entries from my grandfather. And the headline, "The Woman Who Built the Future. A Hidden Legacy Reclaimed." I didn't name Harold. I didn't need to. I just told the truth and let it burn. That night, I returned to the Adams house. For the last time, the lights were on, but the soul was gone. Harold didn't answer the door. Megan did. "He saw the press," she said quietly. "He's not coming back." "Where is he?" She shrugged. "All I know is, he lost. And he knows it." We stood in silence for a beat. Then she looked at me and smiled, small but real. "You did it. You know," she said. "You flipped the narrative." "No," I replied. I corrected it. But inside, something still ached. Not regret. Not fear. Just weight. The weight of truth finally told. The weight of a name rebuilt. The weight of becoming. I found the letter folded between two weathered pages of Grandpa's notebook. Its edges yellowed. The ink slightly bled, as if time had tried to blur the truth, but failed. It wasn't dated, just titled, "For Morgan when she's ready." I read it alone, sitting in the corner booth of a sleepy cafe 2 blocks from my office, the kind with warm muffins and terrible coffee. Rain was sliding down the window, the kind of rain that makes the world slow down, the kind that tells you, this moment matters. Morgan, I always knew you'd come back to this, that someday you'd hold this notebook not just with curiosity, but with clarity, with fire. That you'd grow into the kind of person who doesn't just inherit legacy but rewrites it. I didn't choose you to punish Harold. I chose you because you were the only one I saw truly think. You saw through the noise, even when you were 5. And that kind of vision, it can't be taught. It can only be trusted. But now comes the real question. Not what did they take from you? You've already answered that. The question is, what will you leave behind? I stopped there, hand on my chest, like I needed to feel my heart still beating. The waitress offered me a refill. I shook my head. I wasn't thirsty. I was awakening. The letter continued with details Grandpa's vision of a nonprofit tech incubator, open-source AI platforms for education, clean energy analytics tools, projects Harold had shut down in favor of shareholder dividends. At the very end was a P.O. box, with a key taped to the bottom of the page. 3 days later, I opened that box. Inside, blueprints, schematics for tech that was 5, maybe 10 years ahead of anything on the market, and a handwritten clause. Release only when it serves people, not power. It felt like a moral test. One final gate to pass through. Because revenge had always been personal. But this was bigger. This was what the fight had actually been about. Not control. Not titles. But stewardship. Back at the office, the boardroom was silent as I laid the blueprints out on the table. "This is what's next," I said. "But not under Everest. Not under Adams. We're building something new." James raised an eyebrow. "You're dissolving both." I nodded. "The legacy ends here. The work begins now." Silence. Then Isabella grinned. "So, you're going from vengeance to vision." "Not quite," I said. "This was always the vision. We just had to clear the wreckage to see it." We launched the RAA Institute, named for Robert Arthur Adams, but built for every kid who ever got shut out of the room. We staffed it with engineers from underrepresented communities, created fellowships for rural coders, veterans, single moms returning to tech. I donated the patent royalties to fund it. Millions. I gave up power to give others access. And you know what? It felt like breathing after years underwater. Harold never publicly resurfaced, Word got around that he'd relocated to Florida. Retired early. Bitter and alone. I didn't chase him. Didn't sue. Didn't call. But sometimes, I wondered, did he watch from afar as his daughter rewrote the very story he'd tried to control? Did he feel regret? Or just the weight of losing to someone he never believed could win? One Sunday morning, months after the Institute launched, I got a package with no sender. Inside, my grandfather's original slide rule, the one he always kept on his desk. Alongside it, a single scrap of paper, written in Harold's familiar, rigid handwriting. She would have been proud of you. I wasn't, but she would have been. I stared at the note for a long time, not because it healed anything, but because for the first time, it was truthful. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't pretend. And strangely, that honesty was its own kind of peace. So, where am I now? I'm still Morgan Adams. Still the middle child, E. Still the one they overlooked. But now I run a foundation that funds 10 startups a year, all founded by people the system ignored. I speak at high schools and tell girls they don't have to wait for permission. I write under my real name. And I keep that navy blue notebook on my desk. Open. Visible. Because legacy should be a conversation, not a secret. I get messages every day now. From people like you. People who were silenced. Dismissed. Cut out of their own families. Their own futures. And you know what I tell them? Your silence isn't weakness. It's storage. Storage for every word you weren't allowed to say. Every idea they laughed at. Every not yet that turned into never. But one day, that silence cracks. And from it comes something sharper than revenge. Redemption. If you're still watching, here's what I want you to take away. You don't have to be born into power to reclaim it. You don't need their permission to matter. And if your story has been written by someone else for too long, grab the damn pen and start again. And if this story moved you, leave a comment. Tell me what you've built or what you're about to build. Because someone out there needs to hear your voice, just like I needed to reclaim mine. Like my grandfather needed me to finish what he started. And like maybe, just maybe, Harold finally realized he couldn't stop me. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I remembered who I was. Story 2. My name is Rachel Carter. I'm 36 years old. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. I clean floors at a middle school during the day and restock books at the public library at night. Some days, I fall asleep on the bus home, and some nights, I lie awake for hours, watching my son Zaden breathe in his sleep, wondering if I've done enough to protect him from the man who used to share my last name. This story isn't about revenge for me. Not exactly. It's about a courtroom, a child, and a phone I almost threw away. It started the morning of the custody hearing, April 19th, 2023. Zaden, only 8 years old, woke up before me. I heard the quiet clinking of cereal bowls from our tiny kitchen. He'd put on his school clothes by himself, his gray hoodie, faded jeans, the dinosaur socks I got from the dollar bin at Target. He looked calm, braver than I ever remembered being at that age. But I could see the way his fingers gripped the spoon, the tension in his shoulders. That kind of fear doesn't show in a scream. It hides in the way a child gets too quiet. Ready? I asked, kneeling to fix his collar. He nodded. Are you scared? Mom. No? I lied. Are you? He shrugged. A little, but not like before. We left our apartment with the second-hand iPhone tucked into the front pocket of his backpack, old, scratched, mostly used for games. He insisted on bringing it, and I didn't ask why. Not yet. The courthouse was cold, metallic, smelled like overbrewed coffee and nerves. Our lawyer, Diane Westbrook, was waiting in the lobby. She was one of those women who always looked freshly ironed, neat navy suit, clipboard in hand, voice soft but clipped. "You okay, Rachel?" she asked, glancing between me and Zaden. I nodded. As okay as I'm going to be. She looked at Zaden. "You sure about this?" "Champ." Zaden met her eye. "Yes, ma'am." It's funny how people assume that mothers always win custody. That's the myth. Right? The reality is, if you don't have a steady income, a house with a backyard, or a partner who backs you up, your credibility goes out the window. And Damien, my ex-husband, he looked like every judge's dream. Khakis, button down, fresh shave, confident smile. He even brought coffee for the courtroom clerk, the kind of guy who calls everyone sir and ma'am, but used to call me worthless under his breath. "You look good, Rachel," he said before we entered the hearing room, flashing that charming grin. "Almost didn't recognize you without your mop bucket." I didn't answer. I held Zaden's hand tighter. That was the game. Damien always knew how to perform, how to be the perfect ex-husband in public, the concerned father. And he'd been painting me as unstable for months. Rachel's overwhelmed. Rachel works too much. Rachel's too emotional. All while ignoring the text messages where he cursed me out for asking for child support. All while hiding the fact that Zaden sometimes cried after visits with him. But the system, it doesn't see emotional abuse the way it sees bruises. And Damien knew that. We entered the family court hearing room just after 9 a.m. The walls were lined with beige acoustic panels. No jury. Just a judge, a stenographer, and 2 chairs on either side of a long table. Judge Michael Ruiz presided, late 40s. Thoughtful eyes. Latino. The kind of man who measured his words. "Miss Carter." "Mr. Carter." He nodded to us. "Thank you both for being here." Diane opened her binder. Damien leaned back in his seat like he was attending a parent-teacher conference. The first 20 minutes were a blur of documents, testimony, and formal questions. I explained my schedule, my rent, the routine Zaden and I shared. Damien painted himself as a steady hand. "I just want what's best for my son," he said with practiced sincerity. And for a moment, God help me, it seemed like he was winning. Until Zaden spoke. It was the judge who asked. "Mr. Carter," he said, turning toward my son, "would you like to speak?" Zaden looked at me. I didn't nod. I didn't shake my head. I just held my breath. "Yes," Zaden said clearly. He stood up from his chair, walked to the front of the room with his backpack still slung on his shoulders. Judge Ruiz leaned forward. "You understand this is a serious matter, son?" "Yes, sir." Zaden reached into his bag, pulled out the old iPhone, placed it carefully on the table. "I want to play something," he said, glancing at the judge, then at Damien, who looked amused. "Zaden," Damien said, chuckling nervously. "We talked about this. Let him speak." Judge Ruiz interrupted, gently but firmly. Zaden's hands trembled slightly as he tapped into the voice memos app. "I didn't mean to record it," he said. "I just left the phone on by accident. But I kept the file, because I didn't know what else to do." He hit play. The courtroom fell silent. Then came Damien's voice, loud and unmistakable, pouring out of the tinny speaker. "You think your mom loves you more than I do? She's a damn joke. She's lucky I even let her see you. If you tell anyone what I said, you'll regret it. Kid, you hear me? I'll make sure you end up in foster care. You think she's better than me?" That woman wouldn't last a week without someone bailing her out. She's pathetic. Don't forget who pays the bills around here. Zaden didn't flinch. I couldn't breathe. Diane looked like someone had just slapped her. And Damien. His face had gone pale. No more smirk. No more coffee-carrying charm. Just stunned silence. When the recording ended, no one said a word. Judge Ruiz removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly. Then he looked up. Thank you, Zaden, he said quietly. You may sit down. Zaden nodded and returned to his seat beside me. He didn't look at his father once. I wanted to cry, scream, run. Instead, I took Zaden's hand and whispered, I'm so proud of you. His hand tightened in mine. Me too, he whispered back. Judge Ruiz leaned forward again. I need a short recess, he said. His voice measured. This changes things. He stood and left the room. Diane turned to me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. We might actually win this. But just as I allowed myself to hope, Damien leaned toward me and said the words that still haunt me. You have no idea what you've started. And I realized this wasn't over, not even close. You'd think love would look different in hindsight. That after everything, after the yelling, the manipulation, the fear, I'd remember only the red flags. But the truth is, in the beginning, Damien Carter made me feel seen. And when you've spent your whole life being invisible, that kind of attention feels like a miracle. We met when I was 23. Back then, I was waitressing at a 24-hour diner off I-70, still taking online classes for a degree I never finished. My mother, Evelyn, had just moved in with me after her second knee surgery. Money was tight, but I believed I could fix everything if I just kept going. Then Damien walked in at 2:12 Ma ordered eggs over medium and left me a $50 tip with his number written on the receipt. I laughed when I first saw it. Guys like him didn't go for girls like me. He wore pressed slacks, drove a clean sedan, smelled like bergamot and confidence. He talked about investments, networking events, and getting out of this town. He made me feel like I was just passing through some small chapter, like I was meant for more. And for a while, I believed him. We got married a year later in a courthouse downtown. No big wedding. Just 2 witnesses. A dusty Bible, and my mother dabbing her eyes with a napkin. He said he loved my ambition. That I had a spark. But slowly, almost so slowly, I didn't notice he started snuffing that spark out. At first, it was subtle. Don't work so late. Babe, I miss you. You should drop that class. It's not going to help your resume anyway. Why do you need a savings account in your name? That's not trust. By the time Zaden was born, I didn't recognize myself anymore. After Zaden, I stopped working for a while. Damien insisted. He said, "Let me take care of us." And for a few months, I tried to rest. Tried to be the mother I thought I was supposed to be. But it never felt like enough. If the apartment was messy, he'd sigh loudly and wipe counters with passive aggression. If Zaden cried, he'd turn the volume up on the TV and mutter, "You spoil him." And when I brought up the way he dismissed me in front of others, he'd laugh and say, "Don't be dramatic. Rachel, you're lucky I put up with this." That sentence, that "you're lucky I put up with this," it stayed with me longer than any insult. Because it wasn't shouted, it was said like a fact. Like he genuinely believed it. The night I decided to leave was the night Zaden hid in the closet. He was successful. Damien had come home late. Drunk, not fall down. Not sloppy. Just cold. Controlled. I had asked him why his phone had a text from a woman named Melissa. HR. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. He looked at me for a long moment and said, You're really trying to ruin this family over a text. Then he walked into the kitchen, poured himself a drink, and said loud enough for Zaden to hear, "If she ever tries to take you away from me,
Kid, I swear to God.
she'll regret it." I found Zaden 10 minutes later, curled up between the vacuum and a stack of towels. He didn't cry. He just looked up at me and whispered, "Are we safe?" That's when I knew. I packed what I could. My mother helped. We moved out in 2 days, crashing with her friend Angela in her basement until I could find work again. Damien called, left voicemails, emailed, threatened legal action. But I didn't go back. Not this time. But starting over in America isn't easy. When you're a single mother with no degree, no savings, and a former husband who knows how to smile in court. The first job I got was scrubbing classrooms at Lincoln Elementary. Nights. I shelved books at the East Side Public Library, walking home in the dark because bus service stopped at 10 p. Still, it was ours. Our apartment. Our rules. Zaden and I would eat mac and cheese on the floor while watching cartoons. He'd draw on old receipts, and I'd tape them to the fridge like gallery art. For the first time in years, I didn't have to flinch at the sound of keys in the door. But Damien never really left us alone. He filed for shared custody 9 months after I moved out. On paper, it looked harmless. Equal parental involvement, father's rights, all that legalese that makes a man like Damien seem noble. In reality, it meant that every Sunday evening, I had to hand my son over to a man who once threatened to take him away for good. Zaden never said much about those visits, but I noticed the way he'd get quiet Sunday mornings, how he'd pack his bag extra carefully, how he'd come back with his drawings thrown away and his hoodie smelling like Damien's cologne. I asked once, "Is everything okay with Dad?" Zaden looked down and said, "He says I asked too many questions." That's when I gave him my old phone. It was useless to me, screen cracked, battery weak, but it still worked on Wi-Fi, and he could use it for games. "You can keep it," I told him. "Just don't take it to school." Okay. I didn't know he was going to use it to record anything. I didn't know he had already started collecting truth the way kids collect Pokemon cards quietly, secretly, one painful piece at a time. That phone, it became more than a toy. It became a symbol, a secret witness, a pocket-sized shield, and I had no idea how close it came to being erased forever. How one morning, I almost reset it to factory settings because the memory was full. But Zaden stopped me. "Wait," he said, panicked. "There's a game I didn't save yet." He was lying. I see that now. He was protecting the evidence. And now, here we were, courtroom air thick with fear. Truth finally spoken aloud. And Damien. He wasn't smiling anymore, but I knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. Because men like Damien, they don't lose. They change the rules. When we returned home that night, there was a letter taped to our door. No return address. No name. Just 6 words scrawled in black ink. "You've made the wrong enemy. Rachel." And suddenly, I knew. The courtroom wasn't the battlefield. It was only the beginning. The letter was taped crooked on our door, as if whoever left it hadn't cared whether we saw it clearly, only that we felt it. Black Sharpie, capital letters, 6 words. "You've made the wrong enemy. Rachel." My first instinct was to laugh, but it caught in my throat, because deep down, I knew. This was Damien. No return address, no signature. Just his brand of cowardice threats that left bruises on the inside where no one could see. I peeled it off carefully and folded it twice before tucking it into my coat pocket. I didn't want Zaden to see it, but he already had. "Was it Dad?" he asked quietly. I nodded once. He didn't cry, He just turned and walked to the bedroom, dragging his backpack behind him like it weighed 100 pounds. The next day, Damien filed a motion with the court accusing me of manipulating Zaden. He claimed I'd coached our son into recording him, that I weaponized our child, that I was mentally unstable and needed supervised visits. I stared at the paperwork Diane handed me like it was written in another language. "This is what he does," she said. "He throws grenades and waits for the smoke to cover the truth." I wanted to scream. We had proof. We had the recording. But somehow,
I was the one being dragged through the mud.
that week, things got worse. First, my hours at the library were cut budget issues. They said. Then, one of Zaden's teachers pulled me aside during pickup. "We got an anonymous call," she whispered, glancing toward the office. "They said you leave him home alone while you go out at night." I froze. "That's not true. My mom stays with him. Every time." "I know," she said. "But we're mandated reporters. We had to document it." I didn't have to ask who'd called. Damien was trying to build a case little by little, turning the world against me. Even our mailbox became a battleground. Twice that month, we received flyers from private child psychologists offering evaluations for emotionally manipulated minors. One had a sticky note.
"Might be helpful for your son."
A concerned neighbor. It wasn't a neighbor. It was a performance. Damien was staging a narrative, casting himself as the loving, concerned father and me as the unstable, overworked single mom. And the worst part, the system was buying it. Zaden started sleeping with the lights on. He wouldn't say it, but I could feel it. The tension in his small frame. The way he double-checked the locks. The way he asked, "Mom, if someone lies about you in court, does the judge believe them?" I wanted to tell him the truth. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes, the lie sounds better rehearsed than the truth. But instead, I told him, not if we stay brave. Not if we don't give up. He didn't smile. He just nodded. Then he did something I didn't expect. He walked to his backpack, the same one with the cracked iPhone in it, and pulled out a tiny spiral notebook. One of those cheap ones with the green cover and torn edges. "I've been writing stuff down," he said, "in case we need it." He handed it to me. Inside were pages of dates, quotes, things Damien had said during visits. Each entry had a timestamp, a description, sometimes a drawing of Damien's face when he was angry. I didn't know whether to be proud or heartbroken. That night, I cried into my pillow after Zaden fell asleep, because no child should have to become their own witness. One afternoon, I found our neighbor, Mr. Holloway, struggling with his groceries. He's in his 70s, lives across the hall, always leaves a bowl of Werther's caramels by the elevator. I offered to help, and halfway through stacking his bags, he said, "You know, your boy reminds me of my grandson. Same eyes." I smiled. "Thanks. He's a good kid." Then he paused. "Say, that man who's been coming around lately, drives the black Honda." My stomach dropped. "What about him?" "He knocked on my door last week. Said he used to live here and left a box in the storage unit. Asked if I'd let him in with my key." I swallowed hard. "Did you?" "No," he said. "Didn't feel right. He seemed slippery." I nodded slowly, heart pounding.
It was Damien's sauce.
Digging. Watching. Trying to find anything he could use. I thanked Mr. Holloway and went straight to the storage unit. Everything looked untouched. Our winter coats. Old baby toys. Boxes of Zaden's kindergarten artwork. But the padlock was new. I hadn't replaced it. Damien had been here. I reported it to the building manager. but there were no cameras in the storage hallway. No proof. Just another whisper lost in the noise. That night, I made a decision. If Damien wanted to escalate, so would I. The next day, I asked Diane to file a motion of our own, requesting full custody with supervised visitation for Damien. She hesitated. Rachel, are you ready for that kind of war? He'll come harder. He'll try to ruin you. I know, I said, but I'm not the only one in this fight anymore. I looked at Zaden, holding his green notebook like it was a shield. We fight with what we've got. That evening, as I tucked Zaden in, he asked me something I'll never forget. Mom, if I ever forget what Dad's voice sounds like, is that okay? I sat beside him, tracing circles on his back. It's more than okay. Baby, I said. It's healing. He nodded and closed his eyes. And just when I thought the night was over, he whispered. I saved a second recording. My breath caught. What? From last week. I didn't tell you. He said, something worse. He reached into his backpack and handed me the phone again. Same phone. Same cracked screen. Don't listen to it tonight. He said. Wait until morning. You already look tired. He kissed my cheek and rolled over. And I just sat there, in the dark, phone in hand, heart pounding. Because if the first recording shook the courtroom, what could be worse than that? The next morning, I listened. And what I heard on that recording, it didn't just change the case. It changed everything. I waited until the sun was up before pressing play. Zaden had already gone to school. I sat on the edge of the bed, the cracked iPhone in my lap, still smelling faintly of peanut butter from his backpack. My hand hovered over the screen for a second longer than I cared to admit. Then I hit play. The audio was scratchy at first, background noise. Someone opening a car door. Then came Damien's voice, smooth and venom-laced. Look, kid, you think court's gonna fix this. You think your mom's some kind of hero? She's nothing without me. She was nothing before me. There was a pause. I could hear Zaden breathing. You think I'm just gonna let her win? Cute. Let her take you away. Nah, I don't lose. And if I have to burn everything down to prove that, I will. My whole body went cold. But then came the part that stopped my heart. You don't get it. Zay, if I go down, I'm taking her with me. You think Child Protective Services won't be interested in the little notebook she helped you write? You're not the only one I've been recording. Click. End of file. I stared at the wall for a long time. Had he really recorded me? Was that why he had come back to our building to the storage unit? I suddenly remembered all those casual phone calls, moments when I thought I was venting to him after we separated. Was he saving those? Piecing together a trap. I wasn't just scared anymore. I was furious. This wasn't just about custody. Damien was building a full-scale ambush. And I was playing defense. Not anymore. That afternoon, I called Diane and told her I wanted to meet urgently. She cleared an hour, and I brought the phone with me, along with Zaden's notebook, the threatening letter, and my mother's sworn statement about being present for every evening shift. Diane listened to the recording. Her jaw tightened. This isn't just intimidation, she said. It's coercion. He's threatening a minor. Again. And if he really has recordings of you, they'd be inadmissible unless you were informed. That's illegal in Ohio. So we go after him. No, she said. We set a trap. The plan was simple, dangerous, but clean. We'd request a second court hearing, this time focused on new evidence. We wouldn't submit the second recording yet. We'd let him think the first was all we had. Then we'd let him walk into the courtroom believing he still had the upper hand. But before any of that, we needed backup. That's when Diane reached out to Judge Ruiz's assistant and requested a preliminary review under the clause of newly uncovered endangerment evidence. It was rare, but in family court, it could grant us a sealed side hearing. The request was granted. We had 3 days to prepare. In those 3 days, everything changed. I started noticing shadows. The same black Honda parked across the street. A man, probably Damien, sitting behind tinted glass. Engine running. When I walked Zaden to the school bus, I felt eyes on my back. One night, I came home and found the door almost closed but not latched. Zaden swore he didn't forget. I didn't call the cops. What would I even say?
That my ex was watching?
That I felt threatened. This was Damien's game. Pushed just far enough to scare me, but not far enough for anyone else to see. But he underestimated one thing. I wasn't scared anymore. 2 nights before the hearing, I had a dream. Zaden and I were running through a burning house. Every door we opened led to another locked room. Smoke filled our lungs. Damien's voice echoed through the walls. You made this fire. Rachel, you can't save him. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, but Zaden was curled beside me, clutching that green notebook. That notebook had become our anchor, our shared truth in a world full of lies. That morning, I made a final decision. I wasn't just going to defend Zaden anymore. I was going to liberate him. On the morning of the new hearing, I wore a navy dress my mom had altered to fit me after I lost weight last year. Zaden wore a button-up and sneakers that lit up when he walked. He insisted on the backpack again. I didn't argue. Diane met us outside the courthouse, calm as ever. But there was something in her eyes, steel under velvet. We passed through security, waited. Then were called into a smaller courtroom, one with no jury box. Just Judge Ruiz. No public gallery. No cameras. Damien was already there. Said, smirking. He didn't even stand when I entered. Just said, still dragging the kid through this. Huh. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Judge Ruiz started the hearing. Formalities. Brief introductions. Then he turned to Diane. I understand you've brought new evidence to the court. Yes, Your Honor, she said. But first, we'd like to allow Mr. Carter the opportunity to state his concerns regarding alleged manipulation of the minor. That was the bait. Damien bit. He launched into a rehearsed monologue. How I'd turned Zaden against him. How I was emotionally erratic. How I'd encouraged false narratives. He even pulled out a folder printed emails. Texts. Probably cherry-picked to frame me as vindictive. Then he reached for a USB stick. I have recordings, he said. That show Ms. Carter disparaging me in front of Zaden, unprovoked. That show her mental instability. He smiled like he'd already won. May I submit them? Your Honor. Judge Ruiz raised an eyebrow. Were these recordings obtained with Miss Carter's consent? Damien faltered. Not directly. No. But then they're inadmissible under Ohio law. Continue. Diane didn't flinch. Instead, she stood, walked to the judge's bench, and handed over Zaden's second recording along with a signed affidavit from both me and my mother. Notarized and time-stamped. Judge Ruiz played the audio through his private speaker. Silence followed. Then, you don't get it. Zay, if I go down, I'm taking her with me. The judge's face went still. His lips pressed together. When he finally looked up, he didn't speak right away. Then, Mr. Carter, step outside. Now, we watched as the bailiff escorted Damien out of the room. The click of the door behind him was the most satisfying sound I'd heard in months. Then Judge Ruiz looked at me softened. but stern. You've shown remarkable restraint. Miss Carter, I'll be filing an emergency protective order today. Then he looked at Zaden. You're braver than most adults I know. Zaden didn't smile. He just nodded, clutching his backpack. Same green notebook. Same cracked iPhone. But just as we stepped into the hallway, Diane's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, and her face drained of color. She turned to me slowly. Rachel, Damien just filed for emergency full custody in another county. He's trying to move the case across state lines. And suddenly, I realized we hadn't won. We'd just made it to the next level of the war. I should have felt victorious after Judge Ruiz granted that emergency protective order. Instead, I felt hunted. Damien filing for full custody in another county wasn't just legal gamesmanship. It was a declaration of war. He was forum shopping, hoping to find a more favorable judge, a laxer system, or maybe just a place where our names meant nothing, where he could reinvent the narrative from scratch. I called Diane immediately. She was already 2 steps ahead. I've filed an injunction, she said.
But this could take weeks. Maybe months.
If the other county accepts jurisdiction, we're in a whole different ballpark. And if they move fast, Rachel, they could issue a temporary custody order before we even get a court date here. My breath caught. You mean he could?
Temporarily.
Yes. He could try to remove Zaden until it's sorted. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, watching Zaden sleep with his arm wrapped around that green notebook like a teddy bear. Every instinct in me screamed to grab him. Get in the car. Drive far, Alabama. Minnesota. Anywhere with no ties. But I didn't, because that's what Damien would expect. Instead, I planned. The next morning, I did something bold. I walked into the office of a local investigative reporter, Lauren Mendez, from Channel 14 News.
I'd seen her stories.
She didn't just chase headlines, she chased patterns. Unjust evictions, underfunded schools, custody corruption. She believed in exposing rot from within. Her assistant was skeptical at first, but I had proof. I placed the USB drive on her desk, the notebook, the restraining order, and the full file Diane had helped me compile. She read quietly for 5 minutes, then looked up at me. You understand that going public with this, once it's out there, you can't take it back. I nodded. She leaned forward. Are you willing to go on camera? I swallowed hard. Not yet. But you can use my voice, my name, everything. Just blur Zaden's face if it comes to that. She didn't smile. She just stood. You're not the first mother who's come through here like this. But you might be the first with receipts that sharp. By Friday, the report aired. Not my face. Not Zaden's. But the voiceover told the whole story. A father using interstate filings to game custody. A child recording his own abuse. A system slow to protect. Fast to question the mother. It aired at 7:03 p. Mia. By 7:40. My phone had over 100 messages. Some were strangers, mothers, social workers, survivors. Others were reporters, activists, even a retired family court judge who offered to file an amicus brief if needed. But one message stopped me cold. A blocked number. No name. Just a video file. I played it. It was footage Damien standing in front of a liquor store. Mid-rant. Talking on speakerphone. Yeah. I'll win. She'll fold. She always folds. She just needs to be reminded who the hell I am. The voice on the other end. Male. Muffled. Chuckling. You going to make it messy? Damien smirked. Only if I have to. Worst case, I get full custody. Move him to Georgia. What's she gonna do? Cry to Channel 14. He flicked a cigarette at the curb. The video ended. I didn't know who sent it, but I knew what it meant. We weren't alone anymore. I brought the video to Diane the next morning. "This is enough," she said, "for a federal escalation. Especially if he's talking about transporting the child across state lines under coercion." She filed a formal complaint with the Ohio Attorney General's office under interstate endangerment. At the same time, Lauren Mendez followed up with part 2 of the story, this time naming Damien. It aired with a still of his smirking face and the words, "Father or foe? Who protects the children? When family courts can't." And suddenly, people were watching. But Damien didn't back down. He filed for a contempt motion against me, claimed I'd slandered him publicly and jeopardized his career. His lawyer threatened a civil defamation suit. That's when I realized he wasn't afraid of legal consequences. He was afraid of losing the image, the carefully crafted mask of the successful ex-husband, the misunderstood father. So we hit him where it hurt. With Lauren's help, we found out Damien had lied on multiple job applications, concealing the existence of his restraining order and pending hearings. She filed a FOIA request, uncovered his credentials, found discrepancies in his business licenses. A week later, the company he worked for suspended him pending investigation. He tried to play victim, but the internet doesn't forget. A clip of his voice saying, "If I go down, I'm taking her with me," went viral. The comments were brutal. "Heard this before. Run. Rachel. Systemic failure. This guy's a monster. She better win." We're watching now. Zaden didn't fully understand what was happening, but he saw the shift. The kids at school stopped whispering. One of the teachers gave me a tight hug and said, "You're brave." But he also asked me one night, "If Dad hates us now, does that mean we're winning?" I looked him in the eye. "No, baby, it means he's losing." But just when I thought we were safe, I got a notice from Georgia. Damien had filed for emergency jurisdiction down there, claiming Zaden was already in his custody. It was a lie. A full-on, legally documented lie. And if the wrong judge believed it, he could get an order without us even being in the room. The notice from Georgia was stamped urgent. It was addressed to Rachel Carter, known guardian of Zaden Carter. And it hit like a freight train. Damien had filed a sworn affidavit claiming that Zaden was already living with him, and that I had abandoned custody, that he had rescued the child from an emotionally hostile environment. I almost laughed, except it wasn't funny. It was legally dangerous. If any Georgia judge believed that lie even for a day, it could set off a chain reaction that unraveled everything we'd built. Worse, they'd scheduled the emergency hearing in 2 days. Just 48 hours to stop a false narrative from becoming law. Diane jumped into crisis mode. "I've already filed for an interstate challenge under the UCCJEA," she said, flipping through case law and scribbled phone numbers. "We have primary jurisdiction because Zaden has never resided in Georgia. But if their clerk pushes it through, we might need to appear virtually or in person." "Virtually?" I asked, clutching my coffee like a lifeline. "Yes, and we'll need evidence, time-stamped. Watertight. Everything that proves Zaden never left Ohio. That part we had, but would it matter? Because Damien wasn't just lying anymore. He was fabricating timelines. That night, Zaden came to my room with his backpack again. He opened the green notebook, flipped to a page from 2 weeks ago, and pointed. "I drew the calendar," he said. "You told me to keep track of every day." The page was a grid rough, but accurate. Each day marked with events. Library trip, grandma's sleepover, school pizza Friday. Then, he flipped the page again. He had written, "Still in Ohio, still safe, I hugged him so tightly he squeaked. He didn't even flinch. He just whispered, "Mom, if he lies, can we show the truth and win?" I didn't answer right away. But inside me, something snapped into focus. We didn't just need to prove he was lying. We needed to end his ability to lie and get away with it. The next morning, I met with Lauren Mendez again. This time, I was done hiding. "I'll go on camera," I said. Face visible, voice clear. She blinked, surprised.
Are you sure?
I nodded. It's not just for me anymore. He's doing this to other women. I guarantee it. She looked at me for a long time, then said, "In that case, we'll go live." The segment aired the next evening prime time. It opened with clips of Damien's contradictory legal filings, overlaid with courtroom audio from our sealed hearing. The voiceover made it clear. This father, facing allegations of coercion and recorded abuse, has filed for custody in a second state, claiming the child is in his care. Then my face filled the screen. No makeup, no soft lighting, just me tired, plain, resolute. He's lying to the courts. He's lying to everyone. And I won't let my son be collateral damage. Within the hour, the video exploded. TikTok stitched it. Twitter reposted it. Even Reddit got hold of it. Someone found Damien's LinkedIn and started dissecting his trail of shady job shifts. But the most unexpected thing, a woman emailed me. Subject line: "You're not the only one." She said her name was Samantha, and she'd dated Damien for 6 months. 2 years ago. She'd moved states after he threatened her. But now, after seeing the broadcast, she was willing to testify. She had voicemails, screenshots of Damien, calling her a practice run for controlling his ex. Samantha became our third-party witness. Diane was ecstatic. This might tip the whole case. We submitted an emergency injunction to the Georgia court, attaching Samantha's declaration, our digital evidence, and the green notebook pages scanned and signed. We also made sure Zaden's school submitted official attendance logs. The Georgia judge reviewed it in a remote hearing. I watched through the webcam, my heart in my throat. Damien was also on the call. He looked smaller somehow, tired, sweaty, like the lies were catching up to him. The judge wasn't impressed. "I see no credible evidence the child ever left Ohio," she said. "This filing is dismissed. And Mr. Carter, your actions may constitute legal fraud." She paused. "And that will be reviewed." The screen went black. I cried. Not because it was over, because for the first time I felt safe. But Damien wasn't done. That night, we received another letter. Handwritten. "You've made me look like a monster. You don't get to walk away clean. Watch your back. Rachel." Zaden found it before I did. He didn't cry. He just said, he's scared. That's why he writes in all caps. I asked him what he meant. And he said, people who are loud on paper are usually weak in real life. The next morning, the restraining order was extended another 6 months. And then something beautiful happened. Zaden came home from school holding a certificate. Student of the Week. For resilience, kindness, and courage. He tucked it into his green notebook. "Can we frame this?" he asked. I nodded. We went to Target and picked the sturdiest frame they had. Matte black. Shatterproof. "Like us," he said. I thought that would be the end. But then Diane called.
"There's one more card to play,"
she said. "And it's a big one." I leaned forward. "We're filing for termination of Damien's parental rights under chronic abuse, coercion, and psychological endangerment. I went still. If we win, she said, he'll never have legal access to Zaden again. Not custody, not visitation, not even a say in school forms. I whispered, let's do it. But inside, I knew this wouldn't just be the final move. It would be the one Damien would fight with everything he had left. The courtroom was colder than usual that morning, chilled not just by air conditioning, but by the tension that filled every corner. I could feel it in my shoulders, in the way Diane adjusted her glasses twice without needing to, and how Zaden squeezed my hand under the table without letting go. This was it. The hearing to terminate Damien's parental rights. No more restraining orders. No more supervised visits. This time, if we won, he'd be legally erased from Zaden's life. Damien entered with a new attorney, a sharp-tongued woman in a crimson suit who oozed confidence and contempt. She smiled like this was just another Tuesday. They sat down opposite us. He didn't look at me, but he did look at Zaden, and Zaden looked away, clutching his green notebook like a shield. Judge Ruiz presided again. His presence was quiet but weighty. His reputation for fairness had always been solid, but now the entire courtroom knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about custody anymore. This was about freedom, about whether a child deserved peace even if the father still breathed. Diane opened with surgical precision. She laid out the timeline, every filing, every lie, every attempt by Damien to weaponize the system. Then came the evidence montage. The voicemail where Damien mocked the court. The Georgia filing proven false by timestamped school records. The TV segment. Samantha's sworn testimony. Read aloud in full. And then Zaden's recordings. The judge turned to me. Ms. Carter, does your son wish to address the court? Zaden's fingers twitched. I looked at him. You don't have to, I whispered. Only if you want. He stood. He was wearing a dress shirt he hated and sneakers he loved. Your Honor, he began, voice small but steady. I'm 10. I know what people say. That kids don't always remember things, right? That maybe I got confused. But I wasn't. He opened his green notebook and pulled out a folded page. I wrote this last year. I never showed it to anyone. He handed it to the bailiff, who passed it up. Judge Ruiz read it aloud. Sometimes, I tried to be quiet so Dad wouldn't get mad, but quiet didn't work. Then I tried to laugh at his jokes, but laughing didn't work. Then I tried to love him harder, but love didn't work either. You could have heard a pin drop. I just want to feel safe, all the time, not just on weekends or holidays. I want to grow up without thinking that love always hurts. He sat back down. I couldn't look at him without crying, so I just squeezed his hand. Damien's lawyer stood. She argued rehabilitation, that all parents make mistakes, that this was a vendetta by a vindictive ex-wife. But then Damien did the most self-destructive thing he could have. He requested to speak. Judge Ruiz hesitated, then allowed it. And Damien, cocky, careless, unraveled himself. He started defending the lies, justifying the surveillance, mocking the media attention. He sneered. So what if I told people she was unstable? She dragged my name through the mud. The courtroom stiffened. He turned to the judge. She poisoned my son against me. And now she wants to cut me off like I never existed. Ruiz leaned forward. And what do you believe your son wants, Mr. Carter? Damien shrugged. He's 10. What does he know? There it was. The mask dropped. Judge Ruiz called a recess. When he returned, his voice was grave. In my tenure, I've seen many parents act out of anger, but rarely have I seen a pattern this consistent, this manipulative, this dangerous. He turned to Damien. Your behavior shows a disregard for the emotional well-being of your son, the legal system, and the truth. Then, he looked at me. In the best interest of the child, this court hereby terminates the parental rights of Damien Carter. I felt my knees buckle. Zaden didn't say anything. He just exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for a year. Outside the courthouse, the sky cracked open with the first rain in weeks. Zaden raised his face to the clouds, then said, "Can we go to the park?" I laughed through tears. We did. He ran across the wet grass, arms spread, shoes soaked, free. That night, he taped a new page into his green notebook. On it, he wrote, "Love can still be safe." Then he drew a little frame around it, the same as the one around his Student of the Week certificate. I kept the court documents locked in a drawer, but the green notebook, that stayed on the shelf in our living room. Visible. Permanent. Not because we needed proof anymore, but because it reminded us we survived. Together. If you're watching this, and you feel like nobody believes you, if you've been told it's just drama or you're being emotional, please know this. You are not alone. The system is slow, but you're not powerless. And sometimes, justice doesn't look like handcuffs or headlines. Sometimes, justice is a child sleeping through the night without fear. Sometimes, justice is a blank page waiting to be filled without dread. If this story moved you, please hit like, comment below with green notebook, and subscribe for more true stories that deserve to be heard. And if you've ever survived something no one believed, we believe you here. Always. Because next week, I'm sharing the story of my neighbor who discovered her husband's second family the day after his funeral. You won't want to miss that.